just because with all of the traffic and people coming in late, I didn't want to do it. So what we're going to start talking about today, or what we're going to continue talking about, is this concept of how federalism works in the United States. All right, so one of the first things that we need to understand is that when it comes to the Constitution, there are actually ways to interpret the Constitution. And so one of the things that we need to look at is this idea of a decentralist approach to our federalism or a centralist approach to our federalism. The decentralist approach to our federalism is the idea that the Constitution provides specific responsibilities for the national government. That's the job of the national government. The national government need do nothing else. Okay? So, like, the national government, according to the Constitution, has like 7 jobs. It needs to do those 7 things and then stop. Alright? And so decentralists are going to argue that the 10th Amendment is that little catch-all. And so what the 10th Amendment actually says is if it's basically, it says that if the power wasn't granted to the national government or denied to the states, then it belongs to the states. That's what it says. So the states have that authority. Decentralists believe then that the states have all authority, except that which is expressly stated in the Constitution. And these people believe that if there is a conflict, if there is some sort of confusion as to whose responsibility it is to do something, you err with the side of the state. It's the state's job, it's not the national government's job. These people are what we would call strict constitutionalists. Right? Meaning they believe in a strict interpretation of the Constitution. They do not think that the Constitution is negotiable or interpretable. It is a document that was written, the language in which it was written was specified, and therefore you can only do those things. Alright? These people would argue that the national government is too large and too impersonal. The national government does not know you. It will never know you. It does not care about you. It will never care about you. Alright? They think that the state government is closer to you. And think about this for a second, right? You know the president is Donald Trump, right? Okay? Are y'all ever going to meet Donald Trump? No. No, you will not. No, you will not. You won't. I will bet you my house right now, you will never meet Donald Trump.
I'm going to remember that.
What if we go to the White House? How big is that house? Like, we go on a tour.
Okay, listen.
How big is your house?
Will you ever meet Ted Cruz? The likelihood is higher. Will you ever meet Pete Olson? The likelihood is even higher. Pete Olson is your representative. Pete Olson actually lives around here. In fact, I taught a girl that's a senior this year who apparently knew Pete Olson's kids. Okay? So, the more localized your government gets, because the president obviously has to oversee things for all 330 million of us, right? Ted Cruz oversees things for, what is there, like 26 million Texans? Right? Pete Olson oversees things for like 600,000 people. Okay? So the more decentralized your government gets, the higher likelihood that you're going to interact with them. They might actually know you. They might care about you. They might understand about your problems. Okay? Donald Trump does not know your problems. Okay? Donald Trump has no concept that this school is overcrowded. None. Ted Cruz probably doesn't know that. Pete Olson might. Okay? But your state representatives probably do. So these people are going to argue that the state government is better, it's closer to the people. Alright, now, this is juxtaposed, or in comparison, to the centralist approach. The centralist approach is the idea that the document, the Constitution of the United States, was created by we, the people. That means we own it. We wrote it, we own it. Okay? It doesn't say we the people of 1787. It just says we the people. So that means that the Constitution is then interpretable. Right? And what we think that it means today is what it ultimately means because it's our document. Alright? So centralists are going to utilize clauses in the Constitution like the Commerce Clause or the Elastic Clause to say that the national government has power that needs to expand because there are new ideologies and concepts and responsibilities that exist in the world that did not exist in 1787, so the national government has to be able to do more because we the people need them to do more today. Alright? So here, if there's some sort of conflict between the state and the national government wins. It should be the national government's power and responsibility. And the state should only really be given power if the national government gives that power up. All right? And this is what we call loose constitutionalism. Right? They see the Constitution as an ever-changing document. All right? Now, centralists are going to argue that the size of the federal government has been relatively unchanged in the last 40 to 50 years. This is an accurate statement. Our national government has actually not gotten larger in terms of personnel in that time. All right? Which is one of the reasons why they think that the national government is efficient at what it does. All right? Additionally, they will make the argument that states are sometimes not responsible in terms of protecting your rights. That while they are closer to the people, they are also closer to sort of being subject to the ideology of mob rule.
No, I have a question.
What?
Do you think it's possible for like a celebrity to become the president? Because like a bunch are saying.
You mean like Donald Trump? Then yes.
Well, no, I mean
like another one?
Like movie stars, like people that just.
Well, here's the thing. So Ronald Reagan was a movie star, right? I mean, he was probably a C-list movie star. I mean, he was in a couple of movies with I mean, old actors that y'all might not know, but some. I mean, Trump is nothing but a reality television star. Okay, like, and here's the thing. Look, Donald Trump simply proves how stupid most Americans are. Okay, because you're willing to vote for somebody who has no understanding. Look, I'm more qualified to be president of the United States than Donald Trump is. Okay? No, look, I don't mean that. Listen, I don't think Donald Trump's an idiot. I'm not saying that. But literally, like 3 weeks into the job, he made the comment. He was like, "Wow, this is way more difficult than I thought. I thought this would be easy." Really? You thought being president of the United States was going to be easy? Like, that's absurd. So could Oprah or The Rock or Tom Hanks or I think Chris Rock is saying he's going to run it. Could any of them win? Sure. Look, I guess, listen, I'll be honest with you. So, and Riley can tell you this, because I taught Riley A-Push 2 years ago. Okay? I ran around that classroom being like, there's not a snowball's chance in hell that Donald Trump can win. Not a chance. I promise you, he will not be president of the United States. And I've got a big old foot in my mouth. Okay? So could Kanye win? God, I hope not. Right? I mean, he makes Donald Trump look smart. Okay, so hopefully not. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead. All right, now, what I was saying before the question is the centralists, one of the things that they're going to argue, and this is historically accurate, is that the states will sometimes deny people their rights. So again, if you were a black person living in Alabama in 1930, right, did the states protect your rights? Certainly not. Okay? In which case, sometimes you need the national government to have more power than the states because the states can systematically take rights from people, whereas the national government won't. All right, now, when there is a conflict, historically, one of the things that we have found, and this is the case McCulloch versus Maryland, which is definitely on the old list. It's one of the cases that will be assigned to somebody in this class. I don't know if it made the new list or not. I'd have to go back and look at the new list. But this is the case. I love this because I find this so comical. Basically, the state of Maryland tried to tax the national government. That's awesome. Like, the state of Maryland looked at the national government and was like, hey, you set up a bank in our state, and so we're going to collect taxes from you because of the bank. And to me, that's awesome. Now, when there's that sort of conflict, Maryland lost. You're not allowed to take, you can't collect taxes. The state can't collect taxes from the national government. But Maryland argued that they had the reserve power of taxing. That's true. They do have the power to tax. They just don't have the power to tax the national government. Plus, they argued that the bank itself was unconstitutional, which is an argument that's happened on multiple occasions and ultimately failed. Now, there have been instances within U.S. history, and hopefully you learned this in some U.S. history class, where we didn't have a national bank, but we've now had one for the last 100 plus years, and sadly, it's not going away. All right? So what the court actually says is it's, the bank falls under that elastic clause. It's necessary and proper in order for the government to implement its responsibilities. And two, you can't tax the national government because of national supremacy, and ultimately if states could tax the national government, then they would basically just cause the national government to collapse. right? Now, these are some of the sources of national power, right? The first is the elastic clause. The elastic clause is simply the necessary proper clause, sometimes referred to as both. Basically, it means that the government's allowed to expand its sort of scope and reach in order to do things that are in the best interest of the country. All right, the commerce clause is another one that's frequently used. In fact, it's kind of comically used because from time to time, the national government will tell you that things are interstate commerce that are not actually interstate commerce. All right, but that's the idea. If there's conflict or if there's things that go from one state to another, the national government gets to control it because that's interstate commerce. Okay, the power to tax and spend. Okay, this is not like something that's really afforded, but here's the thing, right? Congress collects money, and then Congress gets to spend money. And so they're technically not allowed to legislate about everything. Theoretically, Congress is not supposed to legislate about education because that's a states' right issue. But they can spend money on education because there's nothing that says they can't. And then you have to learn, anybody know what the golden rule is? Can I tell you all the golden rule when I taught you A-push? No, that's not the golden rule. The golden rule is he who has the gold makes the rule. Okay? So if you're funding and if you're paying for it, you get to dictate what happens. So if the national government is paying for it, then they get to put stipulations on whatever it is that's actually happening. You understand that concept? Right? So they're not just going to hand over free money to people and be like, hey, do what you want with it. Want to go buy a crack pipe? Yeah, awesome. No. Right? Doesn't work that way. Now, if it's your money, you get to put stipulations on what you want to do. All right? Now, with that, states don't actually have to take federal money. Okay? They don't. In fact, the national government says, look, I'm going to give you $10 million, but you have to do A, B, C, and D in order to get said $10 million. Does the state have to take the $10 million? No. If they take the $10 million, do they have to do A, B, C, and D? Yes.
What if
All right?
What if they don't do it? And they don't get the money?
Correct.
They have to do it before they get the money.
Not always. Not always. Sometimes they have to do it at the same time. But if you don't meet your obligation, then basically they're going to impound funds, and it's kind of like defaulting on a loan, and then you would lose money in other areas or other respects. Because that's the other thing you have to understand is that there's all sorts of money channeling into the states from a wide variety of sources. It's not like the national government just goes, hey, here's $500 million, have at it. Right? Instead, it's like, here's $5 million for this, here's $10 million for that, here's $400,000 for this, like whatever it is. Okay? I'm looking for, and hopefully I can find it when we get to it, Rand Paul's Festivus report from this year. Because he talks about some of the ways government spends money. We'll talk about that in more detail later on. All right? But then additionally, and this is an important one here, is the idea of federal mandates. And mandates, you know what that's a vocab term. Do you all know what that term means? A mandate is a requirement, right? So a mandate is something that the national government forces upon you, all right? And so some of them are funded, some of them are unfunded, meaning sometimes they'll give you the money to do what they're telling you have to do. Sometimes they just tell you have to do it, you don't get no money, all right? Now, what's happened is, in recent terms, so one, we talked about this before this long sort of icy break. We understand that we originally started under federalism. We had sort of separate spheres. Then in the 1930s, with FDR, we have more control by the national government. All right, and so that's this evolution towards greater federal control. By the time we hit the end of the 20th century, we go back to this devolution, evolution, and we go back to trying to give power to the states. One of the things that they're going to do that the national government looks at is this idea of trying to reel in unfunded mandates, because that's really where it gets sort of ridiculous. If the national government is telling you, hey, you have to go spend, $10 billion to go accomplish whatever these three goals are, but by the way, we're not going to give you any of that money. You have to figure out how to pay for it yourself. It's a little unfair, all right? And then additionally, more block grants replace categorical grants. We'll go over grants in more detail in a second. All right, welfare is the one example that the AP loves to use. It shows up on the AP test all the time. So in the 1990s, we had welfare reform, and it went from basically being a federal entitlement to a state entitlement. All right, that means the states were allowed to dictate how they funded welfare, who they gave welfare to. And some of this makes sense because there's a means test for welfare, which means you have to qualify for it, right? You have to be so poor that you need the assistance. Okay? Now, if you make $7.25 an hour and you live in Jericho, Kansas, not a real town, but if you live in Kansas, can you survive on $7.25 an hour? You actually probably could. Okay? Like where I come from in West Virginia, you could survive on $7.25 an hour, right? Like you could make minimum wage at Walmart, work 40 hours a week, and get an apartment, you'd be fine. Okay? That's how poor it is where I come from. Now, could you do that in San Francisco, California, or Manhattan? No, absolutely not. So here's part of the reason why you want this to be a state issue, because there needs to be some sort of means test. You don't necessarily need the welfare if you're living in West Virginia or Kansas or Nebraska or wherever, but you absolutely need it even if you are fully employed in somewhere like San Francisco or Manhattan. All right? So that's that idea of it being more the responsibilities of the states. Now, there are strings that get attached to this because the national government, even though they're giving you the money in a block grant and they're telling the states that they have more control, the national government is not going to go completely hands-off. They almost never do. All right? Other things that you see as a result of it, believe it or not, up until the 1990s, there was a national federal speed limit that said you could only go 55 miles an hour on the highway. Right? Like that, yeah, that was the max speed. Okay? Now I'm going to tell you right now, because I've moved a lot. I've driven all across this country. And I can tell you right now, because it happened once, right? I was like up here near Amarillo, and I got a speeding ticket going 103. Yeah. I was like 19. Okay? No, I was 8. I think I was 18. Okay? But I'm going to tell you right now, like honestly, when the cop pulled me over, I was like, sir, I'm really embarrassed, because there's nobody else on this road. It was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so like I could see literally for like 20 miles. Like I thought I would have seen you and slowed down, and you wouldn't have cut me. What? Okay? But here's the thing: like, do you really need to be forced to drive 55 miles an hour up here? No. Dude, that would be infuriating. Think about how mind-numbingly terrible that would be if you had to drive 55 from here to El Paso. Like definitely and so you allow some more state sort of autonomy and control over that, so that the states understand what is or is not sort of safe, right? At times the Supreme Court, and we'll talk about the court in a lot more detail, because sometimes the court is very liberal, sometimes the court is very conservative, but the court has done some things that are consistent with the devolution and trying to take away federal control. Believe it or not, at one point in time, the national government, this is in the 1990s, created a law that said you're not allowed to have a gun at school. Okay? And the national government created this law because they said it was interstate commerce. Yeah, explain that one to me. Right? If you bring a gun from your house to your school, how is that interstate commerce? Y'all know what interstate commerce is? That means you sell things across state line. Yeah, not interstate commerce. And the Supreme Court shut that down, and they were like, no, you can't do that. You can't make a national law that says you can't have a gun at school. Guess what? There's still state laws that say you can't do that, so don't bring a gun to school. All right? Like, there's state and local ordinances that say you can't do it. They just couldn't do it at a national level. All right? Now, when it comes to funding, all right, again, we talked about this. I told you a second ago, we get rid of categorical grants, which have a little more control. We get more to block grants. But one of the things that this really does, by the devolution revolution, I told you that the national government has not really increased in size, right? Instead, what we've done, because the national government has provided more authority to the states, it has increased state bureaucracy or local bureaucracy. So we now have more people working in Austin as a result of the national government affording Austin more control over what's going on in Texas. All right? So that's a significant part of the funding here. All right? With this, I want to go over this one right here. But again, golden rule, because the government's giving you the money, they can create some minimum federal standards for a variety of things. Some of them are things like air or water pollution or quality. Again, and it's generally when the national government does it, it's more of what we see as being national issues, right? Like if you live down here in Louisiana and you have some really strict laws about dumping trash or waste in the Mississippi River, and Can you control it if they're dumping waste in Missouri? No, absolutely not. Right? And because it all flows down, obviously, you're sort of stuck at the bottom. You're going to get the crap from everybody all the way on up. There's nothing you can do to control that. So the national government is going to create some standards to try to ensure that basically one region or area of the United States can't then pollute or cause harm to another area. Right? Same thing with air quality, because if you have a factory in Pittsburgh that produces a lot of carbon dioxide and smog and smoke and pollutants, right? That obviously doesn't just sit over top of the factory. Okay? Wind currents come in and move it, and now all of a sudden you might live in a town that has really strenuous clean air laws, and all of a sudden you're breathing in all of this dirty air as a result of wind currents that has nothing to do with what you actually polluted. What's up?
I have a question. You know how in like Flint, Michigan, they have like they have
Lead in their water?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who's responsible for fixing that?
National government.
So why don't they fix it?
Well, I don't want to say national government. Government is responsible for fixing it. One of the things that happened. So, when the pipes were originally put in, people didn't understand how bad lead was, right? Like, in fact, if you go and buy an old house today, real estate agents have to disclose that the house was built before like 1975 or whatever the year is. They have to tell you if there's lead-based paint in the house, right? Because lead is that toxic. Nobody ever knew it was that toxic. And so the fact that you had lead pipes, nobody understood, like, well, eventually this lead is going to get into the water and it's going to kill everybody. Okay? Once they figured that out, then the national government basically has to, or some level of government has to go in and pay for all of that. What the national government does basically is they prioritize. And sorry for Flint, Michigan, you weren't a priority. Okay? And they prioritize based primarily, but not completely, primarily upon population. Right? So the larger the population, the more the U.S. government's going to prioritize that, because those are the people, like percentage-wise, that's your bigger impact. Okay? So if like rural West Virginia gets left out, well, that's a couple thousand people, tens of thousands, whatever, right? But if you don't fix Manhattan, that's like 8 million people live in Manhattan, right? Like, that's more than the population of like a dozen states. So obviously you're going to prioritize that first because it affects more people. And so that's part of the reason why Flint wasn't sort of fixed initially. Why it's still not fixed today after it's been a known issue for the last year, that's beyond me. Like, at some point when it makes national news, like, somebody needs to just go in and be like, well, you know, we're $20 trillion in debt anyways. What's another, like, 400,000 to fix these pipes? All right, so that brings us to the idea of grants here. All right, so what we used to have, well, this isn't even what we used to have. This is this basic vocabulary here real quick. All right, so categorical grants are for specific programs. All right, so programs larger, but for specific programs. Meaning you can get a categorical grant for something like special education. Okay, you can get a categorical grant for bilingual education. All right. What that means is that money has to go to that specific aspect of education. That is more strict, right, in terms of what is being expected or what is acceptable for use of the money than a block grant, which would just be like education, here you go. All right. Sometimes the national government agrees to what are called formula grants, and it's specifically with categorical grants. Because a formula grant basically says, we're going to split some of the cost here. All right? So in a formula grant, they'll give the state maybe 80%, right? But then they tell the state, you have to pay the other 20%. And if you want the 80%, then you got to front the 20%, and then that'll cover the cost of the project. If you don't want to pay the 20% for the project, then you're not even going to get the 80%. You can't just do like 80% of the work on a national dime. You understand that concept? All right. Project grants are even more specific than categorical grants. All right. So project grants get more specific than categorical grants. Then block grants are what we typically see today with the devolution revolution. They're your broad sort of grants, right? So a grant for transportation. That could mean anything. All right. I mean, if you live in California, for instance, the grant for transportation might be used to build more bike lanes on the side of roads. Because California is trying to figure out ways to not get you to drive a car. All right, revenue sharing is not really a block grant. It's not really a grant. Do you understand the concept of revenue sharing? Revenue sharing is basically sort of a socialism type concept or a communism type concept. Basically, one entity brings in all the money, in this case the national government, and then with everything that the national government has left over, because it doesn't do as much as what it used to, it makes the states do more now, then they basically just give that money back to the states, and the states can do with it what they will. So it's actually a part of like the overall state budget that they can budget in whichever manner that they want to. And then that revenue sharing is based on population. All right, so obviously like California and Alaska don't get the same amount of money, nor should they. Okay, but on the bright side, if you look at, I don't know, let's see if we can't find Connecticut and Oklahoma, right? So they both have seven votes, so they would have relatively equal population. And so they would get relatively equal money in terms of revenue sharing, but it helps offset the difference between what would be a rich state up here and what would be a poor state in terms of Oklahoma. And not that Oklahoma's like really poor, like it doesn't have New England like New York money up there, which Connecticut does. All right. Some of the politics that go along with this, I'm going to tell you right now, this is a little bit of an oversimplification. And truthfully, I don't actually believe in this at all. But this is kind of what you're taught. Okay? So the concept here is that Democrats agree with categorical grants because Democrats want more strings on the money and they want to control it more at the national level. And then they tell you that Republicans want fewer strings, so they prefer block grants. That's not really accurate. Okay? One of the things that hopefully you'll learn in this class as we move forward is that there really isn't any difference between Republicans and Democrats. Okay? I hate to tell you that if you identify as one or you think like Republicans are just like evil people and Democrats have it all figured out, they're the same anymore. Okay? There's not a lot of difference. And the one area where they're definitely the same is both of them really just want to control you anymore. All right? So the fact that we're saying like Republicans want fewer strings, no they don't. Republicans want to control you just the same to the same extent in which Democrats want to control you. They just want to force you to do different things. That's all. That's the only difference. All right. So that's that's what I'm supposed to tell you, Cliff. But I don't buy it. All right. Again, the example here is the welfare block grants or replace categorical block grants, but we do have those federal strings. Even with block grants, there are some. So federal funds can't go to recipients who haven't worked within 2 years. Can't go to people who have been on it for more than 5. And so states have to spend at least 75% of what they had previously spent, which I find this comical because basically you're telling states, like, if you want to keep getting your block grant for welfare, you have to keep giving it away. So you have to keep, like, making people poor so that they can give. Like, that's one of the ridiculous things about government, is they basically give you what you get is based on what you used last year, and so sometimes people will just waste in order to get the same thing for the next year. All right? Our politics here, so hopefully we understand that for the most part, the national approach has won out. Some reasons for this: the size of the U.S. government, the size of the United States, meaning in land mass as well as in population, creates larger problems, larger geographical problems that really need to be handled, or that most people think need to be handled at a national level. Additionally, we tend to classify more things as national problems. I explained the idea of pollution to you already, right? We classify crime now as a national problem. I don't understand a crime one. I really don't. And just so you understand, like, we're not necessarily just talking about, like, Johnny went and beat up Steve outside a bar. Like, that's simple assault. That's not what we're really talking about. But, like, we created this national war on drugs. You all know about this? Okay, so you know that in the 1980s under Ronald Reagan, we created a national war on drugs. so that, you know, if you get caught smoking a little bit of crack, you go to jail for like 5 years because crack is a black person drug. No, I'm not joking. Crack's a black person drug. Cocaine is a white person drug, right? So if you get caught with the same amount of cocaine as you get caught with a crack, they're not the same. Weed is decriminalized now, most places. Okay, but here's the thing. You think about this for a second. You have people that got caught with marijuana that are sitting in federal prison because there was a part of this war on drugs. We have like minimum drugs sentencing. Like there's minimum sentencing for drug offenders. Despite the fact that the American Medical Association classifies addiction today as a mental disorder, like you're actually sick, and instead we just put addicts in prison, right? Because of our national war on drugs, which for the record we're losing miserably, and we will always lose. Okay, we will never win a war on drugs, and you wanna know why? Because when y'all want to get high, you want to figure out something to huff, and you won't get high. That's life. Okay, when there is a desire, right? I know y'all took economics last semester. I don't know how much you learned. Basic supply and demand, right? Basic supply and demand. When there is a demand, somebody will find a way to supply it. Okay? So we're never going to win the war on drugs, but that we make that a national issue. All right? Some of the reaction against big government that comes out in the 80s and 90s. One, we've had massive tax cuts since that point in time. And again, don't think for a second that tax cuts, like, oh, only Republicans do tax cuts. No, Obama cut taxes. Okay? But we've had massive tax cuts since the 70s and 80s because it's a reaction to the idea of big government. We're trying to decrease the size or scope of government. Okay? Additionally, we've elected more outsiders as president. Donald Trump definitely fits that category, but it goes all the way back to the 70s with Jimmy Carter. Anybody know what Carter did before he was president of the United States? What? He was a peanut farmer. That is not establishment. Now, look, Bill Clinton was definitely not establishment. All right, like he was a nothing governor from Arkansas that Democrats didn't even really know. And for the record, he was not a very good Democrat. All right, he really wasn't, because he decreased welfare. He like locked black people up at a much higher rate than any other president prior to him. His wife called black men super predators. Like, not good people as far as Democrats are concerned. But this is what we get, right? So these are outsiders that are now involved in politics. Again, Reagan is an actor, all right, because we don't like big government. Additionally, we've gotten rid of programs that existed. Hopefully you learned about LBJ and the Great Society in your U.S. history class. He did a number of things that were trying to promote sort of welfare policies amongst the impoverished. Some of them were not cost effective, and some of them just simply failed. And so we got rid of some of those, right? We get rid of revenue sharing. We're trying to decrease, and again, the revenue sharing is a result of decreases in taxes. The government's not taking as much money in, right? We reduce categorical grants in favor of block grants. We try to reduce regulations. All of these things that are trying to afford the states a little bit more authority. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I mean, obviously we get rid of the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. We get restrictions on unfunded mandates. But what you'll find is that all sorts of things, there are more restrictions on a number of other things, right? Like state-issued driver's licenses. In fact, there's 4 states today, and I'm pretty sure Minnesota is one of them. If you live in those 4 states, your driver's license is no longer sufficient to board an airplane. Yeah, your driver's license no longer meets minimum federal requirements as a valid form of ID in order to board an airplane.
Why?
Because it's not secure enough.
Because people can forge.
Yes, because people can make fake IDs of Minnesota driver's licenses easier in order to get on the plane and be a terrorist. Look, listen, I'm going to tell you right now, because most of the time when the government extends its power, it's a result of terrorism. Okay? And that is not a post-9/11 thing. That has existed a long time before, because terrorism is not a post-9/11 thing. All right? But again, the Patriot Act is down there too, because that's another big one. All right? Again, some of the other things is during Clinton, like y'all know Clinton got rid of assault weapons. Did y'all notice? Basically, he got rid of a pistol grip on assault weapons. All right, so Oh no, I got plenty of time. Oh, sweet. I got like 7 more minutes. Okay, so let me explain this to you. First of all, anybody in here ever been hunting before?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so if you've been hunting, you've held a rifle. Okay, so what you would basically understand is you hold the barrel of the rifle like this, right? Now, according to the assault ban on, or the ban on assault weapons in the 1990s under Bill Clinton, if you hold the rifle like this, doesn't matter what round it's fired, like what caliber of round, doesn't matter how many, doesn't matter if it's automatic, semi-automatic, fully automatic, none of that matters. Okay? All that mattered is whether or not you hold it like this, or if you put a little pistol grip on it and you can hold it like this in the front. That's what they identified as an assault weapon.
That was on imported, like super strong.
What?
That was on imported weapons, like the AK-47.
No, it was on all.
Was it repealed or something?
No, most laws in the United States only have a small window of time that they're in effect. That's the other ridiculous thing about it. Yeah, they repealed that, like you couldn't have a weapon with that for like 10 years.
Yeah.
And then that's it. And then you can go right back to having that pistol grip on the front stock again. Which, and listen, here's the other thing. I mean, think about this for a second. Does that really change your ability to kill somebody?
No.
No.
It's that
It doesn't at all. But that's, and that's part of the general inefficiency of our national government. Okay, next, more detail on mandates. Now, I mentioned mandates earlier. Mandates are basically federal requirements on things. So mandates are federal requirements. I know at least a handful of us in this room are athletes or we played sports at this school. If you have been to Trailer Stadium, and well, it's too late now because the next time you go to Trailer Stadium, it probably won't matter. But if you had been to Trailer Stadium and you had looked up at the press box, you may have noticed that handicapped people could not get there. Right? Like if you were in a wheelchair, you had no access to the press box. That is in violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, sometimes referred to as the ADA. Okay, the ADA was passed in 1990 or 91, somewhere around it, early 90s. Our press box was built before that point in time, so it's what's called grandfathered, right? Meaning you're not forced to fix it. Okay, but federal mandates say that any new public building, and understand that concept, public building, public school, public building, private school, public building. Okay. If you open up a restaurant, that's a public building. All right, if you build a house, that's a private building. Okay, those are some of the differences. But if you open up a new business, if you build something new, according to the ADA, this is a federal mandate, it must be handicapped accessible. You have to pay for it to be handicapped accessible. If you remodel an existing structure that was grandfathered in, you have to comply with ADA regulations. So, because of the last bond that was passed, we're going to rebuild that press box. Because if you've ever been in that press box during like a George Range Foster football game, and I have, you honestly kind of fear for your life because you feel like that thing might just fall off the backside at any given time. Okay? Yeah, it's terrifying. It really is. But we'll fix that, and the new one will have to have an elevator because of this mandate. So that if you are handicapped, you can get into the press box. Alright? That is the idea of federal mandates. And they're an opportunity to require you to abide by something. I'll give you another example. We've talked about the drinking age yet today?
No.
How old do you have to be to legally consume alcohol in the state of Texas?
21.
21. What about Louisiana?
18.
21. Okay. What about Montana?
18.
21. Okay, in the 1970s, the national government told every state you need to move your drinking age to 21. If you don't move your drinking age to 21, we're going to stop giving you money for federal highways. Meaning like I-10, I-59, interstates. You would stop getting money, funding, to repair and build interstates. Okay? So that is a mandate. Louisiana, and you guys are you're too young to know. Louisiana was the last holdout. Louisiana changed their drinking age to 21 in the mid-90s. Okay? I actually went to Louisiana in 2000. And as I drove through Louisiana, some of the worst roads I'd ever driven on in my life. because by that point they had still not been able to catch up and receive enough federal funding in order to repair all of their roads because they went so long without getting that money. Okay? They thought that they were going to offset it with alcohol, like consumption taxes and sales taxes and things like that, which they ultimately weren't able to do, which is part of the reason why they stopped their holdout. All right, but this is the idea of mandates. Okay. Additionally, there's some financial burdens if it's unfunded, meaning the government's not going to pay for it, but you have to do it anyways. That's ADA. Like, we don't get money to put the elevator into the press box. All right. And states complain about this because they think that it's intrusive. All right. Some Republican response. Now I'm like out of time. The Republicans are trying to get rid of this, or that's the idea in the 90s, because it's intrusive or overly intrusive. All right. So there you go.